Welcome to the 32nd Annual Nebraska Data Users Conference from the Center for Public Affairs Research at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. To ensure that each of you have data resources you've come to expect, we've adapted the conference again to a series of events showcasing timely, accessible, and integral sources and applications of data that impact the lives of Nebraskans. In addition to updates and analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data products, this year will feature new applications in data, new data sources, and we'll host a diverse group of experts to help us make sense of Nebraska's changing demographics. As always, the Center for Public Affairs Research is deeply concerned with the important work you do in our communities. We look forward to hosting you throughout the Data Conference series and working with you throughout the year.
Good morning. My name is Pauline Nunez, and as David said, I'm a partnership coordinator for the U.S. Census Bureau, Denver region. And I'm honored to be here with you today. As David also said, I have been a presenter at the state data conferences and always have enjoyed being part of this conference as well as others in our region. The Denver region really is so proud of the State Data Center in Nebraska because they always are ready and able to help data users throughout the great state of Nebraska. So I'm going to begin today's session with looking at why census data and just a few PowerPoint slides in looking at geography, just as a reminder, because I know I have a wide range of data users with me today that very well versed on geography, whatever, but I just wanted to send this as a reminder to you all, as well as to our novice data users as well. We're going to look at geography, also socioeconomic data, which is ACS 5-year estimates. We'll look at data products like the narrative profile and quick facts, and of course, our replacement for American Fact Finder, which is data.census.gov, and look at some resources. So why census data? So as you all know, you depend on information from the ACS as well as the 2020 census to decide where schools, highway, hospitals, and other important services are needed. And as I saw the list of participants in today's conference, I know that all of you serve your area, your public in various ways. The most important thing is that you also know that data not only assists in planning, but it can equal dollars. Looking at the key geographic areas, of course, so this is the way data is organized. It's always important when you are doing a data search that you understand what geography and what geographies are available. You see here with the nation, we have regions, states, and then we break down to congressional districts for different congressional districts in Nebraska. We also have data by school districts. And then there's a term, which is a census term called places. You'll notice that there's nowhere that says cities and towns. I've added that to this slide. So places are either incorporated or unincorporated. And many of the rural areas of Nebraska have what we call census designated places. So census designated places are those where every 10 years are decided upon by local planning authorities. And they are clusters of populations that people know, but that don't have a government and that you need data for. An example would be, for example, in my hometown of El Paso, Fort Bliss, which is a military installation, is the CDP because it's such an economic engine that planners wanted to have data for that military installation. In rural areas, you can have a water district or maybe a community like in Phoenix, where I work a lot, where they have Sun City that is about 20,000 of a senior living center. So they come in different forms. It also can be a designated place on a reservation. So cities and towns and villages are also places, and that's what you would look for whenever you're doing a data search. And one last thing is if you want to go granular and find out data for your neighborhood, you would also look at a census tract, and then census tracts are further divided into block groups. So for the last 4 years, I was involved with a little project of the census called the 2020 census. So I just wanted to remind you all, what are the differences between 2020 census and ACS, or American Community Survey? Because there has been some confusion. I know some partners of ours have said, oh, well, I can't wait for the data to come out on, say, for example, education. Well, any socioeconomic data is going to come from the ACS. So let's look at the difference. As you know, American Community Survey is a pretty young survey. We started, it used to be the long form. In the decennial of 2000, we still had the short form and the long form. But data users like yourself clamored for more current data. So in 2005, Congress allowed the Census Bureau to start doing the American Community Survey, former long form, on an annual basis, which we update every year, usually in the fall and at the end of the year for the 5-year estimates. So again, the ACS is conducted every month and year, whereas the decennial 2020 census was conducted every 10 years. Keep in mind, it is a sample of addresses, about 3.5 million per year, which is very important when we look at data, because of sample, we have to also think about MOE. The 2020, or the decennial, counts every person living in the US District of Columbia and 5 US territories. Again, this is a main difference. It asks questions about topics not on the 2020 census, such as education, employment, and transportation. There's a shorter list, and as you remember, it may, on the average, took the respondents maybe 9 minutes. And then we do provide current information about communities every year, whereas, as you know, it's every 10 years for a census. What are some of the features of the ACS? Again, I said it was a sample. It covers over 40 topics, and there are 3 key annual data releases. Today, we're mostly going to focus on 5-year estimates, and but we do have a 1-year estimates, and then we have a 1-year supplemental estimates. The 5-year estimates are so important because it does give us that data for small areas. What is the content? So look at also how we organize this data. You'll notice how it translates then into our tables when we go to data.census.gov. So under social, you have certain topics. For example, we have school enrollment, educational attainment, and in economic, you can get data for health insurance, if the population on food stamps or SNAP, what is the employment status, and as well as income and industry and occupation. And many people do not realize that we have quite a bit of data on housing and some new topics like computer and internet use. So the 5-year estimates, just a little bit about those and how you read those. So I always say that the decennial, or a census, is a snapshot of our nation, whereas the 5-year estimates for ACS is a video. It looks at characteristics over a specific period, not a single point in time like the census. So it is not an average. We pool that data across 60 months, and we weigh it to produce estimates. And we control for age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. So they're based on geographic boundaries. So in other words, what that means, if you're looking at a 5-year estimate and say, for example, a city annexed something in 2020, the past year, that will not be reflected in the year ending in 2019. You would have to wait till we update it with 2020. Also, dollar value estimates are inflation adjusted to the most recent year. Like, for example, if you're looking at median household income or any of your income data, it would be for the last year, which is B19. This is the first time that we can compare 5-year estimates. That was a big breaking news in December, that you can compare non-overlapping time periods. So 2015 to 2019, 2010, 2014. And only compare 1 year to 1 year and 5-year estimates to 5-year. You can, as we can see in the quick facts, you can compare across geographies, and you can compare percentages, means, mediums. So just a quick note, whenever I say margin of error, people like roll their eyes. But it is important to consider the MOE. And they are published at most of our tables. So what is it? We do publish the ACS estimates for a 90% confidence level. And basically what's important to understand is the higher the margin of error, the lower your reliability. And if we have more questions about margin of error, we can answer those, but I'll go ahead and continue because I know I have a lot of experience on the conference today. So I'm going to look at socioeconomic data for ACS. It is the nation's most current, reliable, and accessible data source for local statistics on critical planning topics such as age, number of children, veterans, commuting, education, income, and employment. And I went ahead and added this. This usually goes at the end of our PowerPoint slide deck, but I wanted to go ahead and mention it now so I don't forget it before I go live. And I don't know if I have any librarians in the audience today, but I know they would be proud. It's always important if you're presenting to an elected official, to a federal agency, to a foundation, they may ask you, well, where did you get that number? And so you don't want to say, I don't know, or it's just the Census Bureau. So I wanted to give an example of how you cite Census Bureau information, because all of our data is online and it has been for at least 2 decades. And as David knows, through the history of state data centers, we used to rely on the state data centers they had huge disk of data there located. We still rely on our state data centers, but not necessarily to store data because it's all on the internet. So how do you quote this? Like, for example, if you were quoting something you found on Quick Facts, you would just go to US Census Bureau, Quick Facts, you always want your audience to be able to go back to the source and fact check you, and also make sure that you put the date, because as you know, we're always updating our data. Okay. So finally, we're going to go to live demo of 3 data products. One is Quick Facts, which many of you, I'm sure, have used before, the narrative profiles, and data profiles as part of data.census.gov. And I wanted to mention something about today's data tools, and that is that use the power of them, use visualization. You'll see that we have designed even narrative profiles and even Quick Facts, which used to be a pretty static fact sheet. It now allows you to do charts just by 2 clicks. Also, you can go granular. You can go, like, for example, narrative profile. You're able to go down to the census tract level. So don't be afraid to go visual and don't be afraid to go granular. So with that, I'm going to share census.gov. So does everybody see census.gov? I just need someone to tell me. Yes?
Yes, it looks good, Pauline.
Okay, thank you so much, David. So I first wanted to just pause a little bit on our landing page to show you how we are evolving as a Bureau, and we're really trying to be responsive to you as data users and be current. So you'll see here, like, for example, this is, we have an interactive apportionment map, which will be updated next week when we release the 2020 apportionment numbers. We also, and we'll go back to quick facts in a minute, we announced webinars that we had to look at insights on upcoming quality metrics release. And then as we go further, we see that we have America Counts. We are trying to give you examples of how people throughout the United States are using stories behind the numbers. We also, again, are encouraging our data users to go visual. And we have popular visualizations there ready for you to look at and what's going on. Our publications, which used to be hid under one of our tabs, are now, we say, popular publications. And of course, we're trying to keep current with data, for example, with the COVID-19 Interactive Data Hub, which we have gone together with other federal agencies so that the data user just has to go to one hub to look at different resources needed for the pandemic. I also wanted to go over here to one of our tabs for the experimental data products. This is something, again, that we're trying to be current. So I wanted to especially give you an example of this with the Household Pulse Survey and the Small Business Pulse Survey. This is real-time data that we were able to use and look at households. We were able to deploy quickly and efficiently to collect data on how people's lives have been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Same thing with small business. We have been releasing data. Now, this has been on the metropolitan statistical area and state level, and for small business as well. We have been interviewing these so that you as a data user can measure what is the impact. Again, they're called experimental. And so we're looking at new sources or methodologies that benefit you all. We also welcome your feedback. And again, another tab that I wanted to show is that we still have statistics in schools that right now have lessons for parents and educators that are having to work at home and do school at home. So we do still have that resource for you. So just a little look at where we are going for you all as data users. So back to our landing page, I wanted to first start with quick facts. How we find quick facts is you go down and access local data right on our landing page. And I have prepared, I've already done the search, so you went down there, and I've done quick facts with 6 geographies in Nebraska. Quick facts is a powerhouse. Don't forget to use it. It's really a good way to start a search. And especially like if any of you work with elected officials or just want to get to know a particular community, this is a great way to begin because it is a mashup of ACS data, our population estimates. It looks at population change very easily. It also, if you look down in the fact sheet, you see that we have county business patterns as well as economic census data right there for you. So economic, agent sex, population, right there. I did want to call your attention to that if you haven't looked at quick facts for a while, we do have a lot of visual like maps, charts, and dashboards for you to look at. And I also am one that I love FAQs. So if you want to learn how to use the map and you forgot how to use it, you can just click on this What's New in FAQs, and it takes you to a very simple sheet that will tell you, for example, how to do mapping. How do I begin? So it's pretty intuitive, but still, like, for example, you'll notice it has in the chart view, how many geographies can I see and how can I do that? So I love to show data users how to get more information. This is the table view. So say, for example, if I'm Educare, which I know there are some people online today that fund that particular daycare center, if I'm looking to maybe spread out to more parts of Nebraska, and I want to look at what are my persons under 5%, I could just pull out the different cities or counties in Nebraska. I also can look if I'm a city official and I want to know how are we changing and how does that look in the context of different cities in Nebraska? It is right there. And I will remind you about population estimates, which another wonderful feature of QuickFacts is you can line by line, we give you a definition of what that data set is. For example, with population estimates, it's a way that we gauge population change by looking at administrative records as well as birth and death certificates on an annual basis with a partnership we have with different states, all the states in the union. Also, when we look at race and Hispanic origin, for those of you who do federal funding, again, you see where it has an excellent definition of how OMB, which we have to go as a federal agency, and all federal agencies, including congressional districts, look at how we look at race and ethnicity, and that ethnicity is either Hispanic or not Hispanic origin. So great stuff there. And then say, for example, back to looking at children under 5. If I want to look at a fact like that, it will go right to it. And if I want to look at a chart, again, going visual, I can either go with each city or view my selected locations, and voila. With not a lot of effort, you're able to compare and have a nice chart that you can download and look at different aspects of a population. So if I'm looking at, well, what's the difference between Crete and Omaha, and it also and how does that compare with the state? Or if I wanted to look at other cities, I would just have to unselect selected locations. So again, this can be very powerful and looks like you did hours of work, but it was just 2 clicks and using the chart. And you can do this with different, like if I was looking at Agency on Aging and I wanted to look at persons 65 and over, again, I just clicked over that particular fact. So really nice navigation tools and really nice visuals. And again, if you wanted to download any of your material from QuickFacts, there's a CSV version there, which will be an Excel you can print. And you can also embed it into your website if you have an interesting fact that you wanted to share on your website, or those of you who love social media, if you wanted to share whatever information you wanted, we do have that capability on Twitter or Facebook. So that is QuickFacts. So don't forget, it can go visual, and also it does not go lower if it covers all counties in Nebraska, but only cities that have a population of 5,000 or more, and of course on a state, and you can always compare states with the United States. I wanted to go to the narrative profile. So I'll go back, and you know that you can always click on that logo and go back to our landing page. So the narrative profile, I find, is one of our best kept secrets, unfortunately. It is like no other data product that we have because it involves text, and it takes us a while to compile it. But we do release it once a year with the ACS release. Most of our data, as you know, are on tables. This one is actually in a narrative, which is wonderful for grant writers. I know a lot of the grant writers that I have trained over the years have loved the product of narrative profile. But before I go there, I just wanted for you experienced ACS users, the landing page of ACS, I went just to surveys and to ACS, really gives you a lot of information. Don't forget that we have guidance for data users. And I used this the other day to answer a question about when do I use what, so let me go there. So they were asking me when to use the 1-year versus the 5-year estimates. So I gave them this citation. There's also a great handbook for data users here. And then which data tool or table should I use? And what are the subjects covered in the survey? Really great information. I used it myself to answer a question from a data user about currency because he was looking at median household income. So back to the landing page. I'm going to go to data. And again, this is the only way to get to the narrative profile. We do have this as part of the slide deck. So you see I have narrative profiles here. And the narrative profile is an analytic report that has 15 subject areas. You can see that we have about 8 geographies. We have the zip code tabulation area, which are most frequently occurring zip codes. And then also we have AIAN, homeland areas, metropolitan areas, and census tracts. So again, we're able to go granular here and go to a small neighborhood and look at a profile of that area. So if you just go on place, I'll just show you how to get there. And look at the state of Nebraska, because places are part of, they're not like census tracts that are part of a county. And I pick Nebraska, so then it will show me all the places in Nebraska. And I'm going for one of my cities that I picked before, because it's smaller and it's Crete. So if anybody's from Crete on the audience, I'm giving you a shout out. So again, this is 15 topic areas. So say, for example, say David and I were chosen to do help with outreach and looking at a vaccination, because now everybody is eligible for vaccinations. But we're sent to different cities to look at what are going to be our challenges and what do we need to keep in mind. I'm going to close all so I see all the different topic areas. So one of the things that's important in our vaccination outreach is, will we have any issues as far as, say, what kind of materials do we need to develop and how do we get to people over their hesitancy to maybe get a vaccination? The reason I pulled on education is because we don't have data on literacy. We don't collect data on literacy, but we do collect data on education attainment. And when I'm looking, David and I are looking at education attainment, we see that in our graph, and again, maybe we put together a report or PowerPoint, we have a graph right here that we can cut and paste and just have to cite where we got it from. And we see that there's a 28.9% less than high school diploma. So that gives us an idea that, wow, maybe some people may not be able to read that well. So we need to make sure that we have materials that are graphic. Also, is language going to be an issue? Here, it tells us, again, look at the narrative. It says that 41.7% spoke a language other than English at home, and that Spanish is spoken. And then we have it not only in narrative, but we also have that wonderful visual that's really important for people like me that love visualizations. But it's also where data is going. And 24.9% report that they did not speak English very well. So something to think about when we're developing our outreach. The last thing I wanted to look at, and just of course you would do this more thoroughly, but this is just for example purposes, I would want to look at what the population looks like. And as I said before, everybody can get a vaccination in the United States. But as you all know, they were, like in the state of Colorado, where I'm speaking to you from, we had different age groups that could go to get their vaccinations. So as you can see in Crete, we have more younger people in this population. So we are going to have to be nimble and make sure that we reach people and possibly do some social media, whatever. But I find this age ratio is a really nice way when people are looking at different, if you're coming with a lens with healthcare as well as education. So wonderful, wonderful graphics and very easy to get to once you know where it is. I
just thought I'd pop in here for a second
yes.
to prompt you a little bit about when we're working with some of these smaller area geographies or smaller towns. sometimes there's a trade-off between that granular level of the data being very localized and the data accuracy that it has. So I just thought you might like to share with data users a little bit about how you react, or if you see something in this profile that might seem a little bit strange. There is that margin of error component. So how do you work within that when you are on the profile and seeing things that you want to explore further?
Well, what I would recommend always, the margin of error is a topic that's very important to me, as well as citation, because I have had, even in data classes, where people have said, oh my goodness, all these grandparents are taking care of grandchildren when they look at, for example, our social data. And then I always caution them to say, look at the margin of error to see if that's really a reliable statistic. So I always say, don't forget about it, and maybe double check if something looks out of line with a table. So definitely. And the other thing I always say to data users is that the census data is part of your story. I always will validate, like, for example, schools and school districts look at, for example, if I'm looking at serving a certain population, a school district, I may look at free lunch programs. So that's data that's valuable that can be coupled or paired with our census data. And of course, I always feel that local knowledge of a community, and I always say this to community groups that are there on the ground, that their local knowledge is part of that mosaic to complete how you're going to either justify your grant or how you're going to tell your story. So all of this is important, and I'm glad you brought out MOE.
Okay, great. Thanks for that answer. And I know that sometimes we will suggest to folks that they can always expand to a little bit larger geography. So if we were looking at Crete, but then we could also look at Saline County, where Crete is located, because a lot of times there's a lot of housing units right around the city limits that aren't officially part of the city limits.
Right.
So just having a few more cases in sample can really help that accuracy of the data. And while we're here, we had another question come in on the narrative profile regarding whether or not the graphics can be exported, or how you would want to capture that image.
Okay, I'm often asked that question. So how you can do it is by just either you can just do a copy, or you can just do like the snipping tool, which is the easiest way to capture it. And all you have to remember to do is to cite it, to make sure people know where you got that graphic. And they don't need to know how easy it was to get it, but you can just either cut and paste, or you can do a snipping tool. And if anybody else has any other ideas how to copy something, please put it in the Q&A. The other thing too is when you print the narrative profile, which we used to print, we work a lot with congressional districts, and whenever the congressional districts, many times the staff will print out a narrative profile is, say, for example, a senator is visiting Crete, so to speak. And then he or she would have just a whole profile about that particular community he was going to speak at. So they are hard to print out in its entirety. So I did want to state that they are printable, but it's kind of hard to print them out all together. But as far as copying the graphics, it's pretty easy to do. Okay, and I'm hoping if just by Q&A, you could just say yes or whatever. Do you guys like the narrative profile? I always like to ask that question because I know that many people do, but you could just, I can't see you, so I'd like to know if you like it. So another thing, I'm just gonna, before I go to data.census.gov, I did want to mention that it's a lot easier to go granular. Like say, for example, right here, if we wanted to change the geography and say I wanted to look at a neighborhood in Lincoln, I could go to census tract, but what do I have to do? I have to know where that census tract is, right? So, and I also have to know that census tract, two pieces of information. I have to know where that census tract, what the number is, and then also what county is it in. So one of the things that we've been teaching people is, and I'm just going to it, it's the geocoder, which is an easy way. I mean, cities can call up their planning department and say, hey, can you give me a census tract map? So you can do that, but you can actually find out from a single address. Like, for example, if I'm a library and I want to look at my area, look at certain neighborhoods in my area, I can just put in the address of my library and then find out what census tract, and then I could do a narrative profile on that. So I just typed in, I'm just pausing so that people capture that. I just typed in geocoder, and then right here in the front, it says census geocoder. So at first, when I was learning how to use it from our geography department, and I've already typed this in, I found it very mysterious, but actually it is not. I have typed in the address for Educare in Lincoln. So you see here, I put the street, city, state, and zip. And by the way, I could use that zip code also to do a narrative profile. And then I just do find. And it takes a little bit of time, but once it goes in, I hope it didn't, yes. So then you have to scroll down, and me not being a patient person, I hand scroll down to see that the census tract is over here. You see where it says census tract 30.02? So that census tract 30.02, I would just then have to go back to narrative profile. So do you see it here? I don't know if you're able to see that. Let me highlight it a little bit. So census tract 3002 in Lancaster County, I'd have to know where the county is. And so if I would go there and then put on census tract, then I'd have to know the state, Nebraska, then I'd go to Lancaster County, it'd prompt me for that. And then it would go scroll down to all the census tracts, and I could put 3002, and there I would be, okay? So another way, again, you could go visual here, and you could go to a neighborhood or a zip code to learn from a small area and have a very nice narrative profile. Again, though, as David cautioned, and I will support that, be careful when you go. The smaller you go, the smaller the sample, and that should alert you to the MOE. Now I'm going to go over to, I know I must have a few, because some of you have attended David's and state data conferences for many, many years. And I think there was an award given at the 25th anniversary. So many of you remember American Fact Finder. And that's the way I was doing training. So now I'm having to be retrained on our new tool of data.census.gov. Let me go over to, that's one of the things I wanted to show you. But data.census.gov, when it first came out, as usual, when there's a change, we hear a lot from data users. They don't like it. Why do we have to change? And so the change actually, and I was one of those, I'll be honest, that was kicking and screaming, why do we have to change American Fact Finder? But actually, there's been some really nice features, and we have enhanced the data user experience. So this is the landing page. It's data.census.gov, and there's all kinds of references on data.census.gov on our website, census.gov. I will say to you that this is also the place for those of you who are at all involved with redistricting or want to see the 2020 numbers that will be released the end of September. This is where you will find them, in data.census.gov. So I did not want to neglect to mention that. So as I scroll, one of my favorite parts of how we're trying to be more accessible to our data users is that we have FAQs all over the place. Same thing with this landing page. So again, it's a little bit hard to find, but if you go all the way down, it has this FAQ section, which I really like, and I think it's very useful to all of us, including myself. So the FAQs talks about what is data.census.gov. But what's really nice is that it has these how-to materials, which we didn't really have for American Fact Finder. And say it has like accessing race iterated tables, advanced search, how do you use that? And so here's the tips and tricks. So it actually, what I like is it gives me a lot of visual and tells me how I can search and do an advanced search and do a more complex search. How do I do detailed pop groups, like by tribal, by ancestry, or health insurance, cross tabulations. And you can print those out and have them at your computer so you can kind of walk through those. These I find are very handy. And that was all in the FAQ section. The other resource we have for data users is this video tutorial. Again, we didn't have these. I was at the beginning of the Census Academy and did some, but we didn't have these video tutorials. So if you guys cook, or I like to look at different things like how do you make great rice or quinoa or whatever. So very short clips on how to cook something. Well, this is the same concept. They're very short clips on how to do one thing. Like, for example, how to select your area to access data using data.census.gov. How do you customize and download tables? We have one of our staff people walking you through it. Very easy. We also have webinars. We have upcoming webinars as well as recorded webinars on different subjects. You can view all the webinars there. These take a little bit longer. They're about an hour, but really great information. And you can take notes from them at your leisure. So again, we're trying to make our data easier and wanting you to have the tools you need to learn how to do complex searches. So our landing page, I'm going to do an advanced, you can find tables if you already know your tables or whatever, you can put them on there. I'm going to advanced search this morning. So keep in mind, most of us have done shopping a little bit too much probably this past year online. Well, the same concept, and it's very similar to American Fact Finder as well, that it uses filters. So that's the first thing, is that just think about, like if I was doing an online order for groceries and I didn't want to go out in the snow that we have had recently in Colorado, that I would have to filter down, like say if I wanted to go to produce and get a certain kind of tomato, I would have to filter down. Same thing with data.census.gov. We are filtering, we're shopping for data. And so look at our filters. So we have topics, which is an intuitive way to start a data search, right? So you have your business and economy down to populations and people, and then they have subgroups under that. We have geography, of course, very, very important. You cannot do a data search without geography. The years refer to the vintage years of any of your data sets. We have what are the surveys, and this is where you'll find the 2020 census data, but we're going to do 5-year estimates here. And then if you're a business person and want to find a NAICS code, this is where you'd find it here. So again, just filter down to what you need. Today, I'm just going to go to geography, and I'm going to go on the county level right now. And I'm going to search within Nebraska. And so as I start typing, similar to what you all were used to, just looks a little bit different in data.census.gov. So I wanted to look at all counties in Nebraska. Another thing I wanted to mention is you saw that we did quick facts. So those are good for a start of a search, how to look at a community, how to look at population estimates, real easy. So those are overviews, as well as the narrative profiles. Those are overviews. Depending on what you're doing at a particular day, that may be all you need. However, this is the deeper dive. This is where most data users live, here at data.census.gov. Don't forget about those others because those are useful, but this is also the deeper search for data. Again, we've tried to make it easier. So that's my geography, all counties in Nebraska. So again, as I select something, which I did, if you'll see at the bottom of my screen, it says all counties in Nebraska. Okay, so my surveys, I know that I want to go to a popular data tables, and I'm going to use 5-year. to do that. So again, I selected 5-year estimates. That's not necessarily how you would do your search. You might start with topics. Say if I'm agency on aging, I may go to topics and go to older population. So I'm just giving you one example of how to use a filter. And so once I do that, I just do surveys and 5-year estimates. Then I go to the search function. And while you're there, you could always filter down. So I really, again, these are profiles. And if I did one geography, it would have just come up with that geography and had an explanation a little bit about that particular geography, like if I would have done a city. But today I'm doing a data profile. These are very popular tables. So again, going back to my exploration, say if I'm looking at, okay, I'm doing vaccination outreach. If I wanted to look at county by county, and again, in data.census.gov, I'm not going to do it today, but you can play with the table. You can customize it so it looks at, even before you do a download, you can play with it to make it look like what you want it to look like. So a lot easier to do it than FactFinder. The other thing too is going back to the MOEs. One thing you may always want, and it's on the slide deck, you may want to use a percentage, which will increase your reliability of a particular data point that you're looking at. So say, for example, I'm going to use language, and I'm just scrolling down for language. You can see that the data profile has a lot of the information that was on that content page that we looked at the slide deck. So as you can see here, language spoken at home, we go to population 5 years and over. And over the years when I've done data training, I've always tried to make sure that people read the tables. Because like, for example, language, our cutoff point is 5 years and over. It's not, why is that? Well, because babies don't talk. And so we have to have a cutoff point for the population of language. So 5 years and over, it's not all the children like under 5, like, but it's 5 years and over for language. And then we go into much more specific categories than you saw at the narrative profile. And then when you look at other languages, this also includes native languages as well. And then, like for example, in education attainment, we do 2 data points for education, that is school enrollment and also educational attainment. In this particular data profile, it says population 25 years and over. We do publish 18 years and over, but for a quick view, for an overview, we have that cutoff point as well. Please pay attention to that, because as you describe your population, you want to make sure you include that so people know exactly what you are talking about. And again, notice the detail. And economic characteristics, this is all things economic for the different counties of Nebraska. And in here, you'll have employment status, commuting to work, which again, I want to caution, the latest is 2015 to 2019, does not include 2020, which the end of the year are going to be showing different things. And we'll see how the data is influenced by this last year when hardly anyone was commuting to work. And then we have industry. And then also it goes into percentage of families and people and poverty levels. And so with income, we look at household income and family income. And in poverty, we'll look at individuals as well as families. I like for people to understand our terminology and how we actually organize the data, because then it facilitates you answering a question possibly on a federal grant to understand what that is, and make sure you look at, I've always told data grant writers, look at what you're asked to make sure you get the right data point to fill in that blank. And so I always encourage people to look at our glossary to make sure you understand what do we mean by, for example, class of worker, what is included in income and benefits. And then, like, for example, with disability or health insurance, we always say the civilian non-institutionalized population, because we don't include, of course, military, okay? One fun thing that I wanted to do in data.census.gov, in my final few minutes before you do Q&A, is again, there's an opportunity here to go visual. So if you go and select, say, for example, I'm on economic and you go to the maps, it will allow you, and I hope I have the map results here. It does allow you, like I picked out percentage of families and people whose income in the past 12 months is below the poverty level. And again, remember my geography was all the counties in Nebraska. So you can see here, like say again, if David and I were doing the vaccination research and kind of picking out counties that have maybe some vulnerable populations, we possibly could start here. And you see your legend here. So if I'm looking at percentage of families and people who is living below the poverty level, the darker that green color, the darker and the more higher the percentage of poverty. So again, I show you this visual in data.census.gov so you can see that all three tools that we looked at this morning has a way for you to go, except for, of course, Quick Facts only lets you go to 5,000 for cities, but it does allow you to go to all counties, lets you go to smaller geographies, also allows you to present your data in a very interesting way by going visual. And with that, I'm going to close to see, David, if you have any questions.
Yes, so we do have a few questions, and a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question of Pauline or myself, go ahead and list it into the Q&A function. One point before we go to questions, just regarding the geocoder that you showed, and wanted to mention that for folks who are familiar with FactFinder, there used to be an address search that you could do right within that system. So the same way you would load an address and it would go and it would show you all the relevant geographies, like the congressional district, the unicameral district for here in Nebraska, zip code, other factors, school district, and things like that. So with this geocoder, it's a little bit simpler, and it spits out census tract and other detailed information, but there are some limits to this geocoder. The question was asked if you can do more than one address at a time, and yes, there is a batch geocoding function. I don't know if it's on the exact same page or not, but it is there and available for use. One of the questions that we had related back to the narrative profile and the original quick facts that you showed, and that was if there's a way to split the ACS data versus the decennial census data. Like the quick facts were kind of showing it all grouped together from time to time. So just any thoughts on that, or how you might want to deal with that situation when you're looking for particular statistics of interest?
So the question is, can you split it? I didn't quite gather.
Yeah, I suppose, you could take a look at particular parts of quick facts, and again, maybe use your snipping tool or something like that to highlight or go into certain sections of the report. But that, they were wondering, could you like filter to see only certain topics within quick facts?
Yes, you can. You can do that either with the topics. I don't know if I have time to share that. Do I have time to share it or no?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yes, you can. That's what's, for those of you who've used quick facts before, we have to scroll all the way down, and let me go to quick facts, see if I can get it to go. So then when you're in quick facts, I just want to show the general. So you see where it says all topics. So like say if I wanted to go to computer and internet use, it'll just show you that, and you can just download that piece. I love that about that you don't have to have everything down. And I really like that, so that you could just present that. And then but you can, I do want to mention that when you do this part, the topics, it won't let you do the chart as easily. You have to do the fact to do that chart that I did. Like say, for example, persons, you can do the chart that way. Of course, you'd have to have different, so now it's looking at states, but you have to do it through the fact. That's the only difference I saw. But yes, you can do that. And remember, it's about 6 geographies that you can work with quick facts.
Okay, and we had another question that came through regarding margin of error, and I'll have a comment on this one in addition to yours, but is there a point at which you would not cite a statistic based upon having a high margin of error? And specifically talking as a journalist or somebody working with media, you know, putting numbers out there, is there a time where you would hold back and not use a particular statistic?
You know, I'm glad you're going to make a comment about this as well. I kind of probably know what you're going to say. It's a journalist asking the question. I really like that because unfortunately, many times when I've dealt with journalists, they kind of brush out the margin of error. We leave that judgment up to the data user, but we with very high caution that, again, like I had someone really in Apache Junction, I still remember it, Apache Junction, Arizona, that said, you know, that whole thing about grandparents taking care of grandchildren in their community. And I just walked back and said, really, look at that. And the margin of error was over the roof. And so then she made the judgment that probably I may not want to do that. So we don't have a recommendation like is, you know, plus 10, minus 10 or higher than that. It's, again, it's something that the data user has to make a judgment on. But David, what would you like to say?
Okay, I'm going to screen share to help take an example of this. And one thing about data.census.gov is that Google Chrome is the preferred browser. Firefox works well as well, but Google Chrome is
always use Chrome
by the Bureau. So again, just using one of the profiles, and when you have data that you use a lot, you'll start to understand these numbers of the table so that you can use that as kind of a quick search. So this is going to be the economic profile. And just on the quick search here, you can type in a, excuse me, a geography. So I'm going to go with Arthur County in Nebraska, which is our smallest one, because that will have the fewest amount of cases in the sample. So here with using the table number, it pops right up, so you can click it. And then one thing to expand the screen, I'm going to hit customize table. So this left-hand column disappears. And now you're in a layout that's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to scroll down to the poverty example and take a look at one here for children under 18. So child poverty would be a very common statistic that wants to be viewed. And we can see that the estimate is at 18.5%. However, the margin of error is nearly as high as the estimate. So if you subtract 15, you'd go all the way down to 3% and all the way up over 30%. So that is a very wide margin of error. And generally speaking, our rule of thumb that we've used from time to time is to say, if that margin of error is half of what the estimate is, then that's a red flag. So if it was 9 or above on the margin of error, that would be a red flag. And again, conversely, you can see my search up here. If we switch this into a larger geography, so I'm just going to type in Lancaster County as our second largest county in the state, and we go down to that same level, we're going to see a much smaller margin of error. So here again is the children at 13% plus or minus 1.5. You know,
great example.
That's nowhere close to half of what the estimate is. That margin of error would have to be, you know, 6.5% to draw the red flag. So I think, yes, there are times where a certain statistic does not have the reliability that it needs. So that would be cause for concern and not want to report that particular one for Arthur County. Okay, I'm going to
I like that example, David.
There was another question regarding the best way to drill down to find age and race. So since I'm already screen sharing, I can do that one because that's the kind of thing that we do all the time. So if from the quick search, you can select a particular topic, and that's probably the quickest way to get there. But then if you are interested in a particular racial group, I would list that out as well. So Black or African American, you can see that the table kind of pops up here. So you could click on that. I'm going to go ahead and just click search so that people can see what the results would look like. And there's a variety of different results. And since we didn't filter by year or by program, there's probably some decennial census data that would come up in the list.
Yes.
But we're going to look for more current information of American Community Survey. So I'm clicking here for Black or African American, and then you can see by gender the specific age breakdowns, and hopefully those would be in categories that the user was interested in. One thing, again, with the customized table that's really nice is that right from here, we can go and adjust the geography. I didn't do a geography search.
Yes.
So just
I
by
like
clicking the menu, usually, yeah, this is what I'm more familiar with. So then you could go find the particular geography of interest. So again, just clicking through to go find Nebraska in the state list rather than the US. And then that table would update. Okay, so we have the age and sex table here that we were looking at. One thing, also notice the drop down where you can click not only into the 5-year data products, which will have a little more accuracy, especially when we want to split something by race, but you could go grab the other time frames of data very quickly and easily to compare things over time. Okay, so hopefully that kind of walked people through how they got there. Again, you could enter in your geography up here at the top, and that should also be more accurate when it finds the information right there. So
I also wanted to mention while you're on there that because I did notice that I think there was 1 or 2 area agency on aging. And keep in mind that we do also have subject tables. And so that you can have tables that are really great, especially, I mean, it was made for the Older Americans Act that are for 60 and over and 65 and over. And there's also subject tables on poverty. So those are really nice that, you know, say if you do the same report every year, those are really nice to have in your back pocket.
Okay, and the same person who'd asked that question about age range for a racial group has a follow-up related to specifically if they wanted to know age 10 to 18. So a little bit more specific group. And that is where you would have to make potentially a trade-off. So if I go back there again and just pull that up really quick, and go into the table that I want to see, which is B01B. Keep mistyping things.
And do you see that the state data center is a great resource for data users? David is showing you why. Because state data users and state data centers have a formal arrangement with the Census Bureau. We've had for decades with this particular state data center. And they work with data all the time. We present data, we compile data, but those data state centers, they know your state and they're always working with crunching data. Go ahead, David.
So here is that table again, and she was interested in 10 to 18, and that is not where that particular table breaks.
Sure.
And that's a very common thing that we see.
Yes.
So again, it might not be as accurate, but one of the things that could be done is they could simply divide this number, the 1828, by 2 as a proxy to split up that 18 and 19 category. It's a trade-off. There's also public use microdata that we could use. It's a little bit more of an advanced product where you can run your own custom tabulation. So reach out to us at our office if you'd be interested in doing that. That way you could specifically get, if it was if it was the most important thing was to have the best number for 10 to 18-year-olds for a particular racial group, then that public use microdata is always an option as well. So just wanted to point that out. But notice, of course, that this is split by gender. So to get total 10 to 18-year-olds, you'd have to sum up the two. And again, you could run through the download menus to pull down the whole table, or you can just right click onto this set of cells, copy them into Excel, and use Excel as a calculator to very quickly and easily make that division of 18 and 19-year-olds, or to take and add in the males to get that total. So it'd be very, very simple. I'll stop the screen share here and go back to where I can more easily access the questions again.
Okay.
There was a question of, can you aggregate stats for multiple counties in data.census.gov, or do you recommend making those aggregations in Excel? So speak to the ability or capabilities of aggregation, and I can provide some additional comments as well.
I'm going to let you provide that because you do this, like, again, the last 4 years I've been doing 2020 census, so I haven't played a lot with Excel spreadsheets. I've always found it better to download because you can play more, but what's your recommendation?
Yeah, I would agree. Data.census.gov does not have a function where you can fully take and aggregate data. So let's say on this particular example, we also wanted to look at the state of Iowa. Okay, so Nebraska, Iowa, sharing the common border and seeing a two-state region. So when we look at that, you know, the data comes this way, and maybe to simplify it a little bit, I turn the margin of error off. Okay, so that is something that
Although we do take it into account.
For, yeah, we remember it, but again, sometimes we want the more practical use. So it would be easiest to aggregate this data either again by copying it over into Excel or using your download menu. I will throw a shout out here. Let's see if my menus are kind of in the way. Let me switch to a different browser. I might be able to see things a little bit more easily. Okay, to the Nebraska Community Opportunity Map. That's one of the partners that we work with through the Nebraska Children and Family Foundation. Here it is. And that is one where you do have more aggregation capabilities. So
very nice.
You can load this up, and it will have various layers. So you could go in and custom select whichever counties you want. Okay, let me go to a different menu. Let's say we want to do counties, and I'll pick in like Douglas County right here. So it's going to use that as a result. Then you could add additional areas to it. So there's Washington County. You know, you can custom select. So let me just try that quick. Douglas and Washington right here. So you can see that both have been selected now. It's kind of updating a little bit, but that would do an aggregation. So your output over here is fully aggregated, at least on the topics that they're focusing on. So a lot of them are child-related issues such as child poverty, et cetera. But that is a resource that can be used that is pretty nice as well. Okay. I've seen that additional couple of questions have come through. Oh, I guess we have already answered that one.
And we have 3 more minutes, I think, David.
Yeah, I would ask you, Pauline, maybe you could share a little bit about the statistics in schools, you know, and how that might be used, given that that's such an important topic right now. Whether you want to share something live or just speaking about it in general for what that is. We didn't get to see an example of it, so I think people might be interested.
Oh, nice. Okay. I'm a big supporter of statistics in schools. Let me see if I can go live. So share. So if I go to census.gov, it's pretty easy to, we used to have in the 2010, we had, so the way you go to one of the ways is you just go information for educators and students. And so do you notice how it says parents, caregivers, and teachers explore this page for at home or distant learning activities? And it talks about how there's some teacher design activities, easy to use, and it's valuable. You have classroom activities that include from math, English. It started with the Census Bureau wanting to explore and to encourage statistics being embedded in a curriculum. And the activities, and this just shows that we're on Pinterest, and then you can subscribe to get timely SIS updates. We also have our youth, we've had this for a while, to explore state facts. And then we also are recruiting, and we'd love to have Nebraskans. We are also recruiting for statistics and school teacher ambassadors, which get certain programs. And then see how it says April resources. So it's a really, these are all free. And as you can see, they're different. They have National Library Week, National Tell a Story Day, just different types of activities that are very interesting. We have different, here has the resources, learn about, and they have, let me just go to warm-up activities. So see, they even have like warm-up activities. This is a really timely one, the amazing apportionment machine, voting participation, all kinds of different things that a student can use, or a teacher, because we have the teacher guides as well, to make learning more fun, or they can do it by report. But there's different topics, and it goes from pre-K to 12. The more sophisticated ones actually teach the kids how to do things like quick facts.
Sure.
So really great resources for educators.
Okay, well, I just thought people might like to see a little bit more about that given the environment that we're in. So
sure.
I want to thank Pauline so much for sharing her knowledge with us today. You know, it's great to see the demonstration of data.census.gov and answer all the questions. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to keep putting them into the chat. But we're going to go ahead and move on to our next session, which is going to share about CPAR data resources. And then again, we'll have a break at 10:45 or so and start a third session at 11 o'clock. So I'm welcoming in Josie Schaefer, our director, who's going to moderate the next session. So take it away, Josie.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Pauline, for that wonderful presentation, and David for always being our guiding light for census data here in Nebraska. We highly encourage folks to use data.census.gov, reach out to David and CPAR if you need help with that resource. That's what we're here to do. But every once in a while, maybe you're a small nonprofit and you just need one quick data point for a local grant, or maybe you're trying to explore some factors in Nebraska, and like we saw across counties, not everything's always available, and so you're trying to get a lay of the land. And in that case, we have lots of resources available right on the UNO CPAR website to do some of that. So I am so pleased to introduce Melanie Kuiper. She has a long and illustrious career with CPAR of 32 years, and she is the developer of many of the interactives and maps that we make available for you. So I will turn it over to Melanie to walk us through those.
Thanks, Josie. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to demonstrate all of the great data resources that we have at the Center for Public Affairs Research. I'm going to talk about 4 major resources: our website, our publication archive, governing stories, and our staff. On the screen, you will see the homepage of our website at cpar.unomaha.edu. Now, if you registered for this conference, you're probably familiar with our website, but you may not know that our website is just packed with data. I'm going to show you 5 pages where you can find data. You can access most of these from the main navigation menu under What We Do. The first page is hashtag Nebraska by the numbers. This is where we put up announcements about our work, including our recently released publications, data products, and media contributions. It also has a calendar of upcoming activities and outreach. If you have a particular interest, you can search this by keyword. Let's try housing. From here, you can see that there are 4 stories that somehow relate to housing data. The second page I want to show you is our Nebraska State Data Center page. At the top of the page, first we have a couple of interactives. The first allows you to create an infographic of ACS data for the nation, the state, and Nebraska counties. You simply pick your geography, your time period, and then once you have your infographic, you can view it on screen or you can download it as a PDF. The next interactive we have on this page is a choropleth map comparing Nebraska counties on 27 different data points from the ACS, again, for 8 different time periods. Again, here, you can download the map as a PDF or as an image. Next on the page, we have what I call the sharing database. This is a searchable database of data tables and maps that we have created. These are usually created in response to a data request from a community member. So once we compile the data for one person or organization, we then upload it here in case others are looking for the same data. So if you're looking for something specific, maybe you can check here first to see if the work has already been done. On this table, you can sort by counties, by the columns. You can do a keyword search. Again, let's try housing. From here, you can see there are 2 tables and 7 maps related to housing. You simply click on the title to view the document and download it. As most of you know, CPAR is the lead agency of the Nebraska State Data Center Network, but there are 23 other organizations that are part of the network. On this page, we list those agencies and contact information in a table. Again, you can sort these columns, you can do a keyword search, or you can download the data file. The last thing I want to point out on this page is in the right sidebar. Under related resources, we have added links to our new series of video tutorials. We have topics on thematic maps, data for metro areas, and using ACS subject tables. So I suggest watching this spot because we have more video tutorials coming soon. The last page I want to show you is, or the third page I want to show you is our Nebraska State Policy Initiatives page. This page represents our work with the Planning Committee of the Nebraska Legislature. At the top of the page, we have links to the Nebraska Economic Recovery Dashboard. This is a visual tracking system of the state's fiscal health through the COVID-19 pandemic and into recovery. If you click on any of the 4 topic area buttons, business, economy, finance, or workforce, you'll see a series of interactive data visualizations. These data are updated on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annual basis as new data are available. Next on the page are links to reports on studies we have done or been a part of on the impact of the COVID pandemic on businesses, nonprofits, and on our rural transit system. There's also a couple of interactives on this page too. The first one is similar to the county infographics dashboard I showed you earlier, except this one has data for legislative districts. A second interactive A second interactive ranks the districts on 31 different data points from, again, 8 time periods of the ACS, allowing you to see how the districts compare to each other and to Nebraska and the nation. The fourth page I want to share with you is our 2020 census page. This is where we have posted news about the enumeration process, complete count committees, and job postings in the past. It now has a couple of dashboards from the Census Bureau on response rates, and going forward, this is where we will post information and announcements about 2020 data releases, including reports of our own analyses. The last page I want to show you can be accessed from our website footer under Data and Publications. If you click on Nebraska Quick Facts, you will see we've created links directly to the Quick Facts reports that Pauline was talking about, including the DP files from the ACS one-year estimates. We also have links to comparative tables. We have our own county population projections to 2050, a historical population report, and links to the 2010 census tract reference maps. And we'll be adding the 2020 census tract reference maps when they're available. Now, the second major data resource I want to share with you is our publication and conference material archive. You can easily access this, again, from our website footer. Just click on Publication Archive. This archive is a collection of over 800 documents, including publications dating back to the beginning of CPAR in 1963. You can see this is an active archive. We've had over 13,000 downloads of our materials here just in the past year alone. To find the documents that relate to your research, just enter a keyword in the search box. Again, let's try housing. Then you'll see a list of the documents that we have. Click on a title. You can receive more information and you can download. Back on the main archive page, there's a button in the middle of the page called Conference Page. And here you'll find the archive of participant materials from past data users conferences dating back to 2008. The third major data resource I want to share is governing.unomaha.edu. In 2019, Governing Magazine was discontinued by its publisher. We partnered with its data editor to transition 24 of their stories with interactives to a website at the university. CPAR is committed to housing these stories for the foreseeable future. We are also committed to updating these stories as new data becomes available. Most of the data in the stories has been updated at least once since 1929. CPAR has also now started adding new stories. For example, under transportation, we've created a story on vehicle availability for US metros. When you click on the link, you'll see the story and the interactive that we've created that allows you to explore the data on your own. And if I haven't mentioned this before, in addition to downloading these as a PDF or an image, you can also download the raw data used on these visualizations for your own use. This applies to the ones on Governing and on the CPAR website. Simply click the Tableau download button and click crosstabs. The final resource that I want to share with you is perhaps our greatest resource. It's the expertise of our staff. We are here to help you with your data project. If you look at our staff directory, you can click on a headshot to learn more information about the skills and experience that each person has to offer. And if you click on our mission and vision page, you will see the list of services that we offer. They include data analysis, retrieval, acquisition, and organization, policy analysis, quantitative evaluation, survey research, and creating reports, infographics, maps, and interactive dashboards. Simply email us at unocpar@unomaha.edu to start a conversation about your data needs. And even if you don't see a service listed, contact us anyway. It may be something that we can do, or if not, maybe we can connect you with somebody who can. I hope this quick review introduced you to some data resources that will help with your next project. Thank you. Josie, are there any questions?
Thank you, Melanie. It is so exciting to see the hard work that goes into these so beautifully laid out on that CPAR webpage. I get excited every time I go. Folks, we have a little bit of time before we're going to take a break, so get some questions in for Melanie. I will kick us off. I know some of the backstory about the development of these projects, but one of the things that is more recent to our updates on these interactives is the use of API. And for very regular data users, you might know a lot about that. For others, you may not. But I thought you could just sort of mention how you are so quickly updating so many of these interactives to make sure folks have that timely data.
Oh, sure. So the census, a lot of these interactives use census data. So the Census Bureau has a very user-friendly API. And so I use that to, instead of going through census, data.census.gov or through any of the other tools they have, it's simply a matter of writing one line of code and putting it in a browser address window, and then it will download all that data that you need in exactly the format that you need it without any of the extraneous stuff that you don't need. So I would suggest, if anybody is interested in learning more about that API, please let us know and we can share the materials that we have and direct you to some resources on the Census Bureau site. It's very easy to use.
Once you figure it out, it took a minute.
It took a minute, but yes.
And I just think that's such a great resource because that frees us up to be creating even new interactives while also making sure our old interactives remain up to date. Get your questions in, but I could talk to Melanie all day about creating new interactives. So we will ask a couple more. We have grown the amount of interactives that we have available. And just how do you think about those as a resource? I know sometimes it's like, oh, we get lots of questions about that, or tell us what you're thinking when you're saying, hey, I think we need a new interactive. What goes into the idea to have this as a resource?
Sure. I mean, that creative process is always sometimes the most difficult, but I'll give you an example. I mean, recently we added the new chloropleth map on the data center page. And that came about as a result of our observation that we were asked over and over by community members to create a map of this sort on different topics related to the ACS. So it just seemed natural, instead of creating a specific map for a specific organization, that we create a new tool so that people can go on the site, pick the data point that they want and the time period that they want, and they can create their own map. And Tableau allows us to easily do that, and they can download it as an image, and it's just ready for them to pop into a report, much like Pauline was demonstrating in the last session. You can just either snip it or make the image and use it as your own.
Absolutely. And I think all of us over time have been very dedicated to making sure that folks have those data resources. So when we hear that something's of interest, We want to make sure we get back to those folks that asked for it, but also make sure others have access to that as well. Question from the audience. What's the most interesting data set you have worked with recently? And any trends you're seeing as you work with some of that data? Maybe that payroll paycheck protection program one you just did. Sorry, I'm answering your question for you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, that all of the data that we're using on that Nebraska Economic Recovery Dashboard is relatively new data to me, at least, to use, because we've always focused so much on the census data. But it's just amazing how much data is out there. And yeah, the payroll protection program, they put out that data and then they stopped the program, and then they started the program again, and now they're putting out more reports on it. And so it's just interesting, to see how those numbers grow over time.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that we can use that knowledge we've gained of working with data, working with the Census Bureau for all these years to expand out and provide all of these new resources. And plug for me at 11 o'clock, I'll be talking about one of those new data resources that CPAR can use. Another question, do you have a quick way to compare Nebraska data to other states in our area, for instance, contiguous states?
Well, that's actually where the governing.unomaha.edu website might come in handy for the person who's asking this question. So I can share my screen again, and we can go back to that. As you can, a lot of the stories that we have do compare states to states. For example, the states that Americans are moving to. This one gives you a map of the United States along with a line chart. And so here it allows you to compare the different states. So I would suggest maybe exploring some of those governing visualizations, because those are more on a national scope, whereas a lot of the visualizations we create here in CPAR, we are focusing on Nebraska data.
Absolutely. And Rebecca, you give us a really good idea. I think we're always looking for another way to share data in ways that are useful to you all. Another question coming in, expounding more on what you just shared, is there a way to search data for population migration both in and out of Nebraska that can be broken down for workforce purposes, children that come with those people? So that does show overall migration trends. If you want to bring that back up, I use that map all the time. There's not a presentation that I do that doesn't include that migration map. So why don't you bring that one up, Melanie? But I'll just say, so I'm going to talk a little bit about microdata in the next session. David mentioned microdata this morning. There are opportunities to segment this data by subpopulation. It does run up with some of the margin of error issues and things like that. But usually we wouldn't do that in a dashboard unless it was a really common type of question. But yeah, why don't you show us a little bit about that particular governing.unomaha.edu dashboard, because I think folks are always interested in how people are moving around the US.
Yeah, I'm showing how, you can select whatever state that you want. The default of these are always Nebraska, just because we're in Nebraska, but they generally have the data for all of the states. So you can see here the migration in and out of Maryland from and to the other states abroad and the totals.
And again, if we were to segment, it's not a ton of people that are moving around all the time. So if we were to segment that, as Brian asked, about workforce purposes or family units, number of children in the family units that are moving, we'd probably have a fairly large margin of error. It's not something we can't do, but not sure that we'd have a ton of confidence that it accurately represented the population. And I think that's another thing that Melanie might want to speak to in terms of data interactives. What we put up what we put up is data that we have confidence in. And so in using any one of these resources, some of that sort of background statistical thinking is done for you. We're making sure that those are good quality information. David did put in the chat that you could get some of that breakdown from those ACS detailed tables, migration by age group. And we have done some of that. Any other questions for Melanie? Or we can take a little bit of an early break. I want to thank you, Melanie, for all of that hard work. I know that those resources are appreciated throughout Nebraska. So thank you. We are going to take a break. We're going to come back at 11 o'clock for a presentation on the current population survey, a great business resource for data users. Melanie, any closing words?
I would just say that if people don't already know, we are very, very, very open to people coming to us and asking for data. And as Josie said, sometimes it's these questions that people bring to us that really sparks an idea that, oh yeah, this is something we can do. We can create a new map. We can create a new interactive. We now realize that this is something that people want to know, and we want to make it as easy as possible for them to get that. So, like we said, we always love questions. We always like inquiries, and we want to work with everybody.
Oh, we got one more, so hold on a second. Can you post a link in the chat with the state-to-state migration trends? I missed that address. Thank you, Jill. We'll absolutely do that. It's also governing.unomaha.edu, and you can also get to that page from our cpar.unomaha.edu page. So appreciate that.
Participants can't see that chat, so putting that up in the chat doesn't work. But yeah, just go to our website and go down to the footer, and you'll see that governing link.
And we will have resources available on this conference page, both with this presentation, so you can grab them again, as well as links to anything Melanie showed. You know, this data is truly there for all of you. So we want to encourage its use. We want to encourage you to give us feedback about how we can make it even more usable. So let's take a quick break, and we'll see everyone back at 11. Thank you.
Our next session and presentation. So David Drews here, coming to you from the Center for Public Affairs Research and our annual Nebraska Data Users Conference. Before we get started with our next session, and while we're waiting for people to come back on here right at 11 o'clock, wanted to show you a little bit about our web page that's dedicated to the conference, where you'll be able to find our recordings as well as some additional resources. So I'm going to share my screen quick here. And when you have an open browser, there's a link to this in the confirmation email that you received for able to get to the page. But if you don't have that handy, it's very simple as well as short URL goes for our website of cpar.unomaha.edu/April. And that will take you right to our session page for today, where our recordings will be. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that site quick here. So it has some information you've already seen before, like when you registered. We're scrolling down through our sessions. You will see those for the way our day was structured. And then there are a few resources here that we decided to link up, namely the participant list, so you can see other folks who have joined today. There's also one that we found really useful for our data users, this little PDF on finding commonly used census tables off of data.census.gov. So those are some of those demographic profiles that you saw with Pauline. There's also subject tables. And when you have this table number and enter that into the search bar on data.census.gov, then you will always get right where you want to be. So the poverty subject table is really nice, as well as the one on unemployment. So just type in S2301 and a geography like Nebraska in the search bar, and it'll pull right up for you. There's an additional sheet on here of looking at the various types of products that the American Community Survey has. So there's different types. You know, we talked a lot about the narrative profiles, but there's also some ranking tables and supplemental tables that you can see on there, along with all the detailed tables. So it's great that you have those available and can see those when we are no longer in our actual conference, but you're back working in your normal day-to-day activities. Okay, also note on this page that the recordings will go down here when they're ready and with closed captioning and everything. So when we will post those, but then most importantly for later on today, please do complete our evaluation so that we can improve the conference. This is the first of 4 morning sessions. I guess our June session will kind of occur at different parts of the day, but there will be 2 other additional morning sessions in August and October. So let us know what your thoughts are and how we can make any adjustments that would benefit your overall experience. This link, again, if you don't have that URL, is in the confirmation email that you received. Okay, so we are ready to begin with our last session of the morning. And leading that session will be Dr. Josie Schaefer. Josie is our director here at CPAR, and she's led our team for nearly 3 years now. She has a wide range of experiences and research interests, from smaller engaged research projects, collaborating with community partners, to high-profile research such as working with the Planning Committee of the Nebraska Legislature. This session is going to explore the workforce and economic insights that we can produce from the current population survey and other business resources. Josie will highlight information about working families and the impacts from the pandemic. Get your questions ready and put them into the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring those. So let's get started. Josie, take it away.
Thank you, David. Always appreciate all the help all the leadership you provide in putting on this conference year after year, and really making sure that those folks that come year after year get everything that they need and expect from your sort of awesome data power, we'll call it. There was a chat box, I'm going to address that. So the way we're doing the conference series this year, you have the option to register for 1 of 4, or you can register for all 4, but you do need to register for all 4, not just one registration doesn't cover all 4. So I hope that all of you come back for the rest of the series. So let's get started. Here we go. Just make sure I'm clicking through. So as David mentioned, I am going to be talking about the current population survey. It is a data product that I know for a fact has not been talked about in recent Nebraska Data Conference series or conferences. So I think it will be interesting to many and definitely kind of new. But I don't just want to talk about it because it's new. This year has been different than many others, and sort of led me to wanting to talk about this with you all. So let me bring you on that journey first, and it's probably a journey that many of you know and understand as well. If at any time during 2020, someone asked me, "How are you?" I said, "Busy." I said, "Busy," and I think that's true for a lot of reasons, but I think the pandemic really shifted the demand for data in a way that made CPAR as busy as we were. So I'll just take you on that journey quick before we jump in. We helped produce the COVID-19 Impact on Nebraska Businesses survey, 2 rounds of that survey. If you ever thought government doesn't do anything, let me tell you, in the weeks leading up to that survey, we sure did, along with several university partners like the Nebraska Business Development Center and UNL's Business Center, several of the chambers of commerce, as well as our Department of Economic Development and the governor's office, right there as COVID-19 is beginning to impact the state. There's just this brief pause where everyone says, we need information about our businesses and what kind of impact this is going to have on business. And we stepped right in to help produce the survey to understand that. And gleaned some really great insights, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. Things like this, which I'll go into more depth today, but this is just a screenshot from that report. And if you need to check out that report, I really suggest it. There is depth of data in there produced right here in Nebraska. But we saw a disproportional impact of COVID-19 across industries. And compared to, let's say, the Great Recession, that was different. It wasn't a ubiquitous impact across all industries of the same magnitude. And we thought that was interesting and something that our economic development ecosystem needed to understand. We also saw different impacts across the state. Another screenshot from that report. Simultaneously with the COVID business surveys, we work with the Planning Committee of the Nebraska State Legislature, currently chaired by Senator Vargas. And he reached out really early and said, we need a tool to track the economy through the pandemic. And my goodness, I hope we're close to that recovery. And, you know, we know these data points that everyone uses, but they're not all in one place. You know, think about all the dashboards that were developed by the health and human sectors across the country to show COVID-19 rates. And the Planning Committee really asked that we had something like that to focus on the economy. So as Melanie in the last session presented, we created that Nebraska Economic Recovery Dashboard that is still regularly being updated to help people understand the economy. But what I realized during that time is government was coming to us to ask for data. We have been providing data resources to Planning Committee, to other folks for a long time, but sometimes it feels a little bit like, hey, call on me, we have data, we can give it to you. And this felt very different. There was this real demand for the information, folks coming to us looking for resources that they really hadn't before, particularly about business, the workforce, and economy. So I hypothesized that the demand for timely data on the economy, businesses, and the workforce grew throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And this hypothesis, maybe it's obvious to some, but I didn't realize how much demand there would be and what resources we had available to meet that demand. And I'm going to talk about several of those resources and how effective some are at meeting that demand and not so much others. But that demand for data just really grew. And I think we saw this like in the business sector itself, right? That need for business analytics grew, but that need for government informed data grew as well. The next couple slides are by no means confirmatory research, but sometimes if I have an idea, I want to see if it pans out in other places. So I just did a couple quick things to see if other folks were also seeing this demand. So I pulled down the PDF of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and I just did a quick find for the term evidence-based. And it shows up 11 times. Maybe that's a lot, maybe it's not. Went back and compared it to the CARES Act. So during the Trump administration, shows up 4 times, and go all the way back to the American Recovery and Investment Act, and it only said evidence-based once. Again, not confirmatory research by any means, but I think it's interesting that there has been this growth in the concept of let's provide resources in an evidence-based manner. Let's provide policy to respond to this pandemic in an evidence-based manner. Go ahead if you think that means anything. I'm interested to see. This is also just a quick screenshot of a Google Trends. They had a whole Google Trends site set up for the US economy and COVID-19. That to me, again, suggests this was something people were looking for information on in a way they hadn't before. Of course, COVID-19 is not something we've all experienced before. But what it was going to do to the economy, those questions early on, it was concerning. It was concerning, and it wasn't like anything we had seen before, and we knew it was going to have a large effect, but we didn't know exactly what, and as a result, you don't know exactly how to respond to it. This is just search terms for recession. So I believe demand grew for this kind of data, and as the Center for Public Affairs Research, we always want to respond to that demand for resources. We do, in the American Community Survey, for example, have a fair amount of workforce data. We also have some products for business data, I'm going to talk about next. And so, yeah, jump to using these resources to answer some of the questions we had, but did find they didn't answer everything we were being asked. First one here is this Small Business Pulse Survey. There's also a household survey. Notably, this is an experimental product from the United States Census Bureau, along with two others, monthly state retail sales and state sales tax collections. I think that's also another indicator that other folks were seeing this demand for data during COVID-19. It is weekly. David and I were on a workshop the other day with some Census Bureau folks, and they said it is going to keep going for another little bit, but they will have to continue to see how long it goes. But a weekly product exploring what's going on in the business sector, revenue, personnel, operations, very similar questions to the business survey we right here in Nebraska. They do have an interactive dashboard and some data downloads. Because that data is a fairly small sample coming out weekly, there's a little delay on the data. And you can also really only speak for sort of Nebraska businesses as a whole, not too much segmenting or subpopulation searches in there. Household Pulse Survey, also really interesting, but not focused just on business, more workforce. There is the longitudinal employer household dynamics quarterly since 2015. Lots of folks used this. I use this fairly often. Data is reported state, counties, metros, a little bit more limited data at the county level, especially in a very rural state like Nebraska. Lots of online application tools for this. Census Bureau partners with some other folks to make those available. I'll show a quick screenshot of what you can do on there. And then the business formation statistics, also from the United States Census Bureau. Monthly, there are weekly summaries, but again, less data reported. And that looks at births and deaths of businesses. So there are some things to answer these kind of big economic questions we were getting. And I encourage all of you to search out these applications and use them if this is a topic of interest to you. So here's that small business survey. You can go in, select the week, select the question, and you can see that state comparison map, Nebraska. I'm going to say this several times during this presentation, but the impact of COVID-19 on Nebraska's economy was lesser here than many other states, and we'll try to get at why that is as well. Longitudinal employer household dynamics. This is the QWI Explorer, one of several applications that you can jump on and look at data. I use this a lot for looking at the size of businesses. We work sometimes with the Nebraska Business Development Center, and they're very interested in who are our small businesses, and you can get at that here. But same thing, you go in, you select your geography, you select your indicator, and you can see it broke down a couple different ways, not a ton. Business formation statistics, another screenshot from the United States Census Bureau. This is showing the change in the number of businesses by county, which is really great. Not a lot of products after the American Community Survey that you can get at the county level, and you can do that, but not a lot of different indicators. This is just some of that an example of that work we've done with the Nebraska Business Development Center using those last two census resources. So you can really answer some business questions. But man, the questions were coming in fast, and they were coming in different than we normally see. And so that's what sort of led me to look at the current population survey, look at what is available to folks, and see if it could help answer some of those questions. Current population survey, it's a United States Census Bureau and the US Bureau of Labor Statistics together. Interestingly, originally born with a slightly different name in 1930, so coming out of the Great Depression. So I think this demand for economic data is driven by what's going on in the economy, obviously, and these survey products are really important to answering those questions. It's a monthly survey. American Community Survey goes on monthly, but doesn't report data monthly. So that's going to be a big difference here, and especially when we're trying to see that change over time, that change through the pandemic. Monthly surveys are really important to us. Of about 65,000 households, I'm going to explain how that works, but there's more cases than actual unique households surveyed. That sample is smaller than the American Community Survey. It is smaller here in Nebraska as well. So there's less data, but it answers a lot of questions the American Community Survey does not. Focus here is employment, unemployment, components of income. It is the official survey used to develop the unemployment rate. Employment rate, they actually use a slightly different product along with the current population survey, but it is really important for understanding unemployment, and we'll see that in a couple of different ways. It is interview-based, and that's how they get that rich data that we're going to see. There are some downloads. You can go to the current population survey page from the US Bureau of Labor or from the Census Bureau. You can download some data. There are some interactives to work with it, but the best way is to get this IPUMS microdata. So I want to pause for a second and talk about microdata. It's something we've said a couple times today, and if you've ever worked with CPAR, we might have said it to you. So I want to make you comfortable with this concept. As you saw this morning in Pauline's presentation, the Census Bureau very thoughtfully creates these tables, summary tables essentially, with the American Community Survey data, sometimes pulling in that decennial census data. And so they're saying, here's the categories of things people are interested in, a lot like what CPAR will do with our interactives, and let's make that quick, easily available for you to find. But very often folks want to look at some subpopulations or cross tabulations, even do some multivariate analysis with data. And in that case, you really can't use those summaries of the data. You need this microdata. And that is essentially, ID and how each individual or household responds to the survey on all of these factors. Of course, when you download this data, it is super secure. I cannot identify who completed the surveys by any means. I just have like a household ID or something like that. Microdata is available for American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, from this IPUM source, some other national surveys as well. I encourage folks to think about microdata when they're asking research questions, but I will caution that it is certainly not as easy to use as data.census.gov or other summary interactives, aggregate interactives. You have to have a statistical program. So the IPUMS microdata comes for SPSS, STATA, SAS and R. I use Stata, that's what I learned. R is the cool one now, I'm working on it. And they do a couple things to make that data a little bit easier to use, but it is also a very large data set. I have, I think, 19 million IDs in the data set I pulled for this analysis. I showed you a minuscule amount of that, but it did take a long time to get onto my computer and then to read in the coding that makes it a little bit easier to work with, but you still have to know a lot of tips and tricks. You still have to know the code book a little bit. Certainly have to be able to make some assessments about margin of error and things that you feel comfortable showing as you continue to segment and the population you're looking at or subpopulations that you're examining. The margins of errors are going to go up as the sample goes down. So I'm excited about showing people microdata and working with microdata for folks, and you can reach out and talk to us about that if you're not comfortable using it yourself. But I think a lot of our data users are becoming more advanced and may want to do that. So just wanted to share that tip and trick. CPS surveys civilian non-institutionalized households. That is a little different from the American Community Survey. They'll have some group quarters estimates, and they use a rotating panel design. It's real easy. So they're going to choose a group of households, and that'll be a cohort, and they're going to interview them consecutively for 4 months. That's really cool because you can do some longitudinal analysis there. Then that group comes out for 8 months. Thanks for leaving me alone. And then they come back for an additional 4 months before they go out. So you can see in this picture, and it's just a screenshot from IPUMS, that A1, A2, that's a cohort. They're on for those 4 weeks, out for 8, back in for 4. So you can do longitudinal analysis, which you cannot do with the American Community Survey here, but you can also do cross-sectional analysis, just looking month to month at what's going on, because you have a full panel within any month, which you can see there. So January would include folks from the year before as well. They also use a proportional stratified sampling design. This is kind of important when you're talking about a rural state like Nebraska. So stratified sampling means you dice up the state into, or the area you're looking at, into strata, and then you're going to pull a sample. So you're going to ask a group of folks within that strata to take the survey, and you're going to estimate that number that needs to take the survey based on the population, as well as some other demographic characteristics in the current population survey. What does that mean? About 40% of the households in the current population survey are from the Omaha Council Bluffs Metro. Metro is a little bit larger than just Douglas or Sarpy County. Well, that's kind of proportional to what's going on in the state. So it is a good sample. It does speak to Nebraska, but I'm not going to go in and pick counties and try to report data for counties like we would do with the American Community Survey. It's really not representative of all smaller locations. I think I would be very comfortable just reporting for the metro here, especially if I was using multiple years. But in any 1 year, I'm going to speak about Nebraska, I'm going to speak about the Omaha Council Bluffs Metro, but I'm not going to be able to segment the way you can segment geographically the way you can with the American Community Survey. I did check some of the numbers I pulled here that were comparable to some American Community Survey numbers. They were surprisingly close when you're talking about Nebraska as a whole. So let's jump in and see what this tool can do for us. Really importantly, in May of 2020, so already into the pandemic, they added 4 questions, and that's actually not common, but thank you, current population survey folks, for responding to what was an unprecedented event. So we're going to look at 4 questions to begin. We're going to compare Nebraska's rates to the United States, and these are all about employment and COVID. Smaller percentage of Nebraskans were unable to work due to the COVID-19 pandemic compared to the nation. You can see about 12% of Nebraskans in May were unable to work, well, 14.4% to the US. Again, you are going to see that Nebraska fares well in a lot of these employment survey outcomes, and we can talk about why that is in a little bit. You do see another trend that you'll see throughout this presentation, the height of the pandemic. The height of the pandemic really is for Nebraska, starts in March, April, May, June, or some of the worst months for employment here in Nebraska. But that trend does dip down over time. And so ending in December 2020, there is data for January and February of 2021 in the current population survey that I will show. Smaller percentage of Nebraskans were prevented from looking for work due to COVID-19, and those quotes are exact text from the survey questions. Notice these numbers are much smaller at all. Great news. Folks could get out there and find work during the COVID-19, but absolutely some. We're going to dig in on prevented a little bit later. Percent of Nebraskans who receive pay for hours not worked due to COVID-19, pretty close to the national rate. I think that's kind of interesting. So at the height of the pandemic, about 3% received pay, even if they weren't working, and that has dropped off pretty significantly over time. I just want to track in here. These are those paycheck protection programs, 2 rounds. Melanie mentioned them a little bit earlier. So that first round 1, and that was sort of the big one a lot of folks knew about, most of that money was out by April. So there you go. In May, folks are keeping folks on the payroll, even if they're not working. And I can back that up in those COVID business surveys. That was #1 thing that business owners wanted to do here in Nebraska. I don't know about everywhere else, although tracks pretty similarly, but there was a real call to make sure folks stayed on the payroll. It dropped off drastically as that program was used up. We also know there was a lot of questions there early on with how much of it was going to have to be paid back. Was it loans or grants, et cetera? And so, yeah, that stimulus had an impact, but it was not long lasting. And then again, most of the money for round 2 was out in August, and you saw a little bump there, but it doesn't last long. Again, not a ton of people in the group at all. But certainly an important exercise in protecting our workforce. In this question, we are being asked about remote work a lot. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this question. I think I have like 4 slides related to it, so bear with me. The direct question, did you work remotely for pay due to COVID-19? And that Nebraska line looks pretty similar to the US rate. So starting at 15.9, so about 16% of folks by May were working remotely. I was surprised it wasn't higher. If you were to throw it in the Q&A or the chat, I'm interested to hear. There is some questions in the current population survey that looks at telework, that looked at telework before, and US rates were around 25% of folks that worked telework sometimes. So this is specifically totally worked remotely for pay due to COVID-19. So I wonder if folks that were already teleworking obviously are not sort of in this group, and that's some of the discrepancy. But interesting, right? I think if we think back to May, work remote was all we were talking about. And we'll dig into maybe why that's not as high as I thought, at least. We do see it trend down pretty consistently into the fall. This could be a little blip. Rates did go back up again in October after a pretty scary summer. We, got a little colder, rates came back up, and we're right here around the US rate. of 10.5% of folks still working remotely due to COVID. I wanted to talk in this about Nebraska households with one child or more. As someone who worked remotely, still is, I am in my basement. Throughout the pandemic, I think we were all challenged because of schools being out as well. So I made this, and you will see that those with children, one or more, were more likely than just the regular Nebraska rate to work from home. That has more to do with the occupation mix of our more established families, which we'll see that as well. But oh, good, 30% of folks, that's my guess if I was going to apply the percentage to the estimate of households with children, which I don't like to do with the current population survey and more like to just report those percentages. But 100,000-ish households that are able to work remote while those kids are home. Still lots of folks that I have no idea what they were doing. And then I was like, ooh, let me be really interesting here and layer on when schools were out. So I used Omaha Public Schools as my benchmark. Well, I'm a little silly sometimes. So Omaha Public Schools went home in March of 2020. So by May, clearly they're out. They're out till August, but oh wait, when they didn't come back in August, they were still out till December. Omaha Public Schools didn't come back till February. So not a particularly exciting analysis, but a real reminder of how many households were unbelievably challenged and had difficult circumstances and pain on their economic opportunity throughout the pandemic. Dave, I'll let you interrupt in 1 second, but despite that pain, there were kids in masks. That's Rex, who started kindergarten in the pandemic, and Liv and I walking home from dropping him off on the first day. We did find a daycare for her though. Go ahead, Dave.
Just wanted to mention that, just put it into the chat of whether people thought that those work from home numbers were high or low, and everybody who's responded thought that they're very low, and some thought it might be up 40%, in that range. So that's consistent across what our panel or our participants have experienced.
Yeah, so this is really cool. In about one slide, I'm going to show something that I think really helped me to understand that I don't know that we were all thinking about. We kind of just thought everyone went remote, right? Not so much. So let's see one more. Had a media question even this week that asked, is remote here to stay? And I said, I don't think so. So I just layered in January and February of 2021 here, and you will see that the rate is kind of down and leveling off, but we're really only talking about 8% of folks that are still working remotely as a result of COVID-19. So again, this is interesting, and I wanted to understand why it wasn't as high as I thought it would be. And I had an inkling of where I'd find the answer. Everyone take a deep breath, myself included. This is a complicated little chart, but it's going to do a lot of work for us. So let me walk you through it. Over here on the vertical axis, we have median personal income. Okay, higher is better. I like to think as incomes go up, we get a little happier, right? And then across our horizontal axis, we have percent of folks employed. Then the size of the bubble is the answer to the question, did you work remotely? And the actual bubbles themselves are a range of industries. If I grumbled at anybody over the past couple weeks, it was because as much as the IPUMS microdata makes it easy to work with this, they want to give you all of the industry classifications you could ever possibly want so that you can make choices. But if I mapped, I think it's like 92 of them, it would look really messy. So I spent a lot of time trying to collapse these in a thoughtful way. The American Community Survey industry classifications, they do that for you. But they collapse them a little bit differently than I did here. Okay, so median personal income, percent employed. So above the line is above the median income of around 40,000, which is what the current population survey reports it. And you will notice that above the red line, all the bubbles are bigger. Above the red line, so those industries that folks work that pay more were more likely to work remote. I'm going to say it again. I think you probably have it by now. Maybe some of you already knew this, but I think it explains a lot about what has happened here in Nebraska to our economy during COVID-19. Those industries that folks worked in that already paid above the median personal income, they were more likely to go remote. Those lower wage jobs were less likely to go remote. So kind of in those higher wage jobs, yeah, there was a week there where we were all like, oh, I don't know where my computer is. I need a new cord. But once we got set up and we're working remotely, it was life as normal. Those lower wage jobs are where the pain of the COVID-19 pandemic was born. Dave, you have a question?
Yeah, just to clarify, these data, are they for Nebraska or for the US?
This is just for Nebraska. Thank you. This is just for Nebraska here. Okay. The US economy, where the bubbles lay out is a little bit differently, is different. So we're just focusing here on Nebraska. So there's whole sectors that can't work remote, and you're not going to be surprised about what those are. Accommodation and food service, construction, healthcare and social assistance, some of these administrative support positions. That's a little bit bigger. Transportation and warehousing, manufacturing, those don't work remote. And that makes complete sense to me now. But there are, lots of folks in manufacturing that can't work remote. There's lots of folks in Nebraska that work in retail trade that couldn't go remote in the same way someone like myself can, someone in finance and insurance. Education did this time, but who knows about next time. So those higher wage jobs transitioned through the COVID economy much more easily, much more seamlessly. There's less loss of job, which we'll see soon as well, in those higher wage jobs compared to those lower wage jobs. And that's stabilized Nebraska's economy, that we have as many folks as we do working in those high wage industries that transition to remote, that kept, we see those differentials sometimes with Nebraska versus the US of that impact, that economic impact, and that's it. Our economy, our economic mix, our industry mix is such that it's stabilized, that it stayed stable. But the pain of this pandemic was borne by the low wage workers. So already low wage just got lower. We'll see that. Just want to throw this one up. I did a while back using American Community Survey data, and I break them into these 4 segments, and it matches where it's apples to apples comparisons pretty well. The next thing that I really wanted to explore, that you would not be surprised I wanted to explore based on what we've learned this year, was unemployment and employment. And not just, are you unemployed or are you employed, but why? And the current population survey, compared again here to the American Community Survey, has about 3 or 4 questions on employment and unemployment for every one American Community Survey. So this is, again, just a quick screenshot comparing the ACS to the CPS, so you can see the level of detail on that employment and unemployment factors that the American Community Survey does not have. This is going to be an important chart. I'll come back to, we're going to go into depth in almost every one of these categories. 61 point, and this is for Nebraska specifically, and it's for 2020. And I bound it. Again, I could go into 2021, I could go back to 2019, but I set the data to only pull for 2020 here. 61.3%, usually higher, we'll see that over time. are at work, and I'll break down those segments if they're full-time and part-time. Then we have not in the labor force. So why are you not in the labor force? We're going to be able to answer here, 11% of the population. Not in the labor force because you're unable to work, 4%. Has job but not at work last week. So funny that they even asked this, but I'll tell you exactly why folks were not at work, and it is different during 2020 than normal. Percent in armed forces, and then, so unemployed experienced workers. So this is someone that has been in the workforce before and are now unemployed, and then unemployed new worker, maybe someone coming out of school that's looking for a job but hasn't found one yet. So much depth here. Want to start focusing on at work first. This is the percent of Nebraskans at work, and you can see it by year. So going back to 2010, I could go back to 1962. I'm not a historian, I'm not going to do it. And you can see the trend up, and you can actually see the trend down. Nebraska was sort of a little delayed, but certainly not big in its impact from the Great Recession. It was pretty strong there early on, and it got kind of leveled out. Coming in to COVID-19, we had one of the strongest economies in the US for sure that we've had in a while, as was true in Nebraska, and there's that dip in 2020. Not outrageous, which we know, certainly lesser than compared to the US. Here it is by month in 2020. So month in 2020, starting in January. This data is asked every month. So those COVID questions, we just started in May. This goes back to first month of 2020. There's that strong economy. And man, that was a fall. That was a fall. But gradually coming into the summer, it strengthened, but certainly not at pre-pandemic levels. And I will say that it is, we're not back. I think the trajectory is right. It did stall. I think there was in the fall, like, will we get a vaccine? Will we be able to work remotely long-term? So lots of questions, but it continues to strengthen. But early on, everyone said, oh, it's going to be a V shape, right? As fast as it goes down, everything will come back. That is not a V shape. It's kind of like a weird check mark. I will note the first stimulus direct payments came at a really good time. It was absolutely a low point. Nebraska Economic Recovery Dashboard, we did a couple of things with the components of personal income to just show how important that timing there was. So over here, I have that first graph that I showed you. I'm going to go into each of these classifications. So of those 61.3% of folks that are at work, the majority of them are full-time. 23.2% are part-time. They asked so many questions about employment in this survey, obviously. And I think I have like 3 categories combined here. So full-time, but used to be part-time, and full-time, but may go down to part-time. And then same for part-time. I think there's 4 categories here. But the bulk of Nebraskans that are at work are at full-time. I think I want to talk about part-time first, though. So we get questions about underemployment all the time. And we cannot explore that with the American Community Survey or decennial census or anything like that. Current population survey is where we would be able to answer those questions. And we got underemployment questions before COVID-19 pandemic, and we definitely got them during the pandemic. So this question asks, hey, why are you part-time? And not that part-time's bad, but we'd love to know. So the majority, and that was like 23%, right? The majority of that population that is part-time because of they're in school or training or other family personal obligations. They like the time off. Can I go part-time? But here's where we get at underemployment. So slack work, business conditions, full-time, but you know, it's a full-time job, but you don't get the hours you need. Could only find part-time work. Those are our underemployed folks. So it's a fairly small percentage of the already small percentage that are part-time, but that's who's underemployed. So slack work means that's the best I could kind of do. The business conditions don't let me work more or could only find that part-time. So yes, we do have some underemployed folks in Nebraska. And like I said, I get asked that all the time. I never had an answer, but now I can put a number on it if you needed it. Next, we're going to go back. There's those two categories of unemployed experienced worker, and unemployed new worker. And these are the reasons why someone is unemployed. Also interesting. So in 2020, the largest reason that folks were unemployed was due to layoffs. That is not typically the reason why folks are unemployed in Nebraska. I'll go through the other categories, then I'll give you a second. You can guess what you think it is, and then I'll tell you what it is. So layoffs. Then we have this category, other job loser. That's for the folks that don't have a good chance of returning to their employer, which is a nice way of saying terminated. We have reentrant, someone that was in the labor force, was out for some period of time, and now is looking for work again. And I hope I say this right, but unemployed means you were looking for work in the last 4 weeks, but do not have a job. You can't be part-time and unemployed though. You would be part-time and slack work. We have job leavers, folks that are moving on to try something else but haven't quite found it yet. We have those that are in temporary jobs that have ended, and then that smallest category is new entrants, so folks that are looking to join the labor force for the first time. So largest category in 2020 is job loser. That is not usually the largest category. I will show that in a little bit. Give you a second to guess. You can what you think the largest category going back to 2010 is, starting in before 2020. I don't have a ton of time, so it's reentrant. It's reentrant. So folks that have left the labor force for some period of time and are now looking to rejoin. And I think that's kind of interesting as well. But this year it was layoffs. Let's look at it a little more. So we're going back month in 2020, starting in January, and you can see that big spike, as we know, coming in layoffs, matching driving unemployment for sure. Certainly not as high as other states. I just have a note here. Nevada, for instance, 29% unemployment rate. So there's that. I wanted to look at this again. It's actually a slightly less complicated map, but not too much. Here I have on that vertical axis percent of persons unemployed in 2020. So here hires worse. Here hires worse, and then the same horizontal axis, percent of workers employed. You can see those jobs, and I should layer in the bubble as median income. I'll probably do that for my next presentation. Those are those low wage jobs, back to those other ones, and that's where people got laid off. While the people did not get laid off in those exact jobs that you could work remote and were already good paying jobs. So layoffs being the driver, and we know exactly where those layoffs were. I put the red line here at 4% of folks going unemployed in 2020 by those industries. That's actually pretty high for Nebraska. You could bring it down, but you can see where the layoffs happened. Then we go to has job but not at work last week, so absent. Why are folks absent? Vacation and personal days, others. This one, own illness, injury, medical problems. You would not be surprised. That number went way up in 2020. So folks either in that category having COVID themselves or taking care of folks that had COVID. Why not looking for work? This is another category we get asked about a lot. So we have this really high labor force participation rate in Nebraska, but some people choose not to be in the labor force. And so we ask why. We need everybody working here in Nebraska. So this gets at that. And again, no other resource I know of would be able to answer this. So these are the folks that are not in the labor force. Why are they not in the labor force? That's 11% of these households, so a fair chunk. So that first other, please specify, those are the folks that just choose not to be in there. The rest, in school or other training, that's fine. Family responsibilities, well, you know, we could probably support them to get in the labor force, but I can't promise you that. But down here, this is a group you will hear either discouraged workers or marginally attached workers. This category of folks is something we look at nationally. If you ever hear, you know, the unemployment rate is this, but it's probably a lot higher, here's what we're talking about. So these are folks that are not actively looking for work. If they were, they'd be in the unemployed category. But for some reason, they choose not to be in the labor force. And maybe it's not for good reason, it's because they feel discouraged from being in the workforce. And it is an extremely interesting phenomena to look at by industry, by lots of different, by other demographics, something I'm interested in doing in the first place. Who are these discouraged workers and why are they discouraged? Couldn't find work. They feel some ageism. They can't get to work. They don't have the skills and training. We're talking a lot about workforce development in the state. So things like that. I'm going to rush through these last two slides. We commonly get how many people have multiple jobs. You would have to use the current population survey to get that. It's about 7% of those that are at work are at work at multiple jobs. The way they classify that, if you go over 35 hours a week, even if it's at 2 jobs, you go into the full-time category. We could break that down so I could tell you the number of people that are sort of putting together multiple jobs to get into that full-time category, but didn't do it here. Another really interesting thing in the current population survey is the fact that they get at lots of different measures and components of income. Here I just report median income for some of them, but I can do dividends, interest, welfare payments, transfer government subsidies, Social Security income, retirement income. We know, just like we know a lot more about employment and unemployment from the current population survey, we know a lot more about income components as well. We don't have much time, but I want to answer every possible question I can, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Yeah, Josie, we had a couple come in, and one of the things was interesting for folks in that multiple job holders. Is there a national comparison? I mean, did you run the Nebraska? Was it 7%? Did you run the U.S. number on that?
So I don't think for that particular one I did, but we absolutely can. And if that's of interest, I'll make sure to grab it for folks.
Generally, we rank really high in multiple job holders, so we should be above U.S. average, and now we can go detail that a little more specifically. There were a couple other questions, and both related to the bubble graphs. So, you know, if you want to move to those, they're roughly about slide 25 or so. And let me pull up the question. So it says, why do you think there's a relationship between lower paying jobs and not being able to work from home? Okay, so that was the general question. She goes on to ask, do you think it might have to do with education level, or do you have other insights as well?
Sure. So, right, it's one thing to say low wage jobs were more likely not to be remote, but that really doesn't provide you the level of context that, for instance, this slide does. So, accommodation and food service. I think everyone can understand why that didn't translate well to remote. Yes, we had takeout. Gosh, did we have takeout at my house? So yes, we have, we can supplant it, but it's certainly not at the same level of service as going in. And so you couldn't take servers home with you. You couldn't take the chef home with you. And so that doesn't work in a remote environment. So that context there, construction, agriculture, you can't take those remote. But those have always been low wage jobs, and they're low wage jobs other places as well. That's not specific to us. So it's not that low wage jobs can't go remote. It's that most of the low-wage jobs in Nebraska were not the type of jobs that you could take remote. And I think the important thing there is that's what helped our economy stay so strong. We don't have a ton of folks like Nevada that have people working in accommodation and food service. That hurts the economy when you have lots of folks working in that particular low-wage job because it doesn't translate to the remote environment. But that's not really the Nebraska economy. So it's not that low-wage jobs can't go remote, it just happens that many of the jobs that are low-wage also couldn't go remote, if that makes sense.
Sure, and here's kind of another question that's related. It asked, what about some of the ways that the different sectors, or that some sectors affected other sectors? So for instance, sectors that might have low wages may also need childcare, which in turn increases the need for childcare workers who couldn't be remote. So any thoughts on the interconnectedness between sectors and the needs that they have?
Sure. So unbelievably interconnected, and that's why I pulled that slide of not just work remote, but you have kids and you can't work remote. That's really important too. So economy means relationships. The economy isn't a single sector. It is the way that all of the sectors work together. So any one sector having this kind of unemployment, having the layoffs that we clearly saw, has a ripple effect. That's for sure. The ripple effect was lesser because those high wage jobs, and I think the stat is like one doctor, for instance, creates like 16 other jobs. So they were still using those other sectors, even if it wasn't as great. So the ripple effect is absolutely there. The childcare component of this whole story is absolutely there. It's just not as bad as we thought. And a lot of folks are starting to compare the COVID-19 recession to the Great Recession, and they were very different because sort of there was a more universal economic impact in the Great Recession than we saw here. And that's just that those remote jobs stabilized us much more so, but the hurt was definitely still there. And gosh knows the sort of social and behavioral impact of COVID-19 was pretty great as well.
Yeah, relative to the Great Recession, for sure. So we had another question come in just now, relates to something I think a lot of people might want to hear more about, and that is if there are any numbers about working in the gig economy. We hear that from time to time, and this person lists a specific example of a person that they know that's not employed at a single place for more than a week or two. So they're bouncing around from position to position. So thoughts on that?
The current population survey is what's going to get us there. Didn't go into it here, obviously, didn't have even as much time as I thought, but it helps. We can kind of identify temporary workers in a way we can't with other survey products, national survey products, state survey products. So we can look at those temporary works. There's specific questions about being a consultant or being self-employed and coming in and out of the labor force based on projects, why you left projects. There are a lot of questions that can help us to get at the gig economy, which I know is like underemployment, like disadvantaged workers, like multiple job holders. It comes up a lot, and that's why I was so excited to grab. And I'm not an expert at the current population survey at all, and there are experts, but realizing that this could really help answer a lot of questions that folks have about Nebraska's economy. So, those questions I didn't answer today, I have the data set already now. Just send them and I'm happy to answer them.
Sure, and that leads right into kind of our closing question, which is, what other topics are you interested in exploring on the CPS as we move forward?
Thanks. I am a researcher at heart. I never go into a data set looking to answer a specific question. I get so excited by all the other things I can do. So really I want to look at the demographics of folks that are in those high wage versus low wage jobs. I am very interested in the racial, ethnic, and gender wage gaps. And you can look at that with American Community Survey, but you can get at the why they exist with the current population survey. And I can't wait to explore that. I will a little bit more in June, along with my friend at the Women's Fund. Poverty is in here, so you don't have to wait for the American Community Survey to get poverty. It's not as bad as you think. I won't go into it, but I think there's a lot to look at there. But in any one, oh my gosh, right here. So those underemployed folks, what are the demographics of them? What are the racial and ethnic breakdowns? I'm interested in understanding if the economy is working for everyone. And I think I can do that with this particular survey product.
That's perfect. There's always more to learn and explore, and that's the fun of being a researcher for sure. So I want to thank our audience for attending this first segment of our 2021 Data Users Conference series. So we will have additional sessions occurring the last Thursday of June, August, and October. And was mentioned in answering the question, if you haven't already registered for those, do go ahead and do so at the same site, and then you'll get the Zoom links for those particular events. We will make the recordings available of this session soon, so watch your email for the links and instructions for accessing those recordings. And please go ahead and share your thoughts on today's session by completing the evaluation form that was either linked in the email that you received yesterday regarding accessing the webinar, or it's available again at this housing site for our conference at cpar.unomaha.edu/April. So it's just our website /April. So we hope you benefited and enjoyed the information shared this morning. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions or data needs. And just go ahead and have such a great Thursday. And we look forward to talking with you again soon. Bye-bye.